She stood at the edge of the ceremony, and they told her to leave. But when Karoline Leavitt read her name out loud, everyone listened. Subscribe before you start, and leave a comment below where you're joining from. The sun hovered low over Fort Andrews Memorial Grounds, casting long golden shadows over the rows of folding chairs arranged in stiff military symmetry. The occasion, a formal dedication ceremony for the new Fallen Valor Memorial Wall. Uniformed officers gathered in clusters, shaking hands and nodding solemnly, while civilian guests whispered among themselves in hushed reverence. Cameras had been carefully positioned. The press had been briefed. Everything was rehearsed, controlled, but not everyone in attendance had come by invitation. Near the base of a willow tree that stood just outside the cordoned-off seating area, a woman stood quietly, her posture straight but unassuming. She wore no uniform, no badge, no visible credentials. A long black coat clung to her frame, and her gloved hand gripped a leather folder close to her side. Her eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of a worn ball cap, scanned the platform where the ceremony was about to begin. She wasn't just observing, she was waiting. Two security officers noticed her. One leaned toward the other. "She doesn't have a pass," the second nodded. "Let's move her." They approached with measured steps, polite smiles thinly veiling authority. "Ma'am, this area is restricted to families and approved guests. I'm going to have to ask you to relocate to the public viewing zone." The woman didn't respond. Her eyes stayed fixed on the black granite wall covered in velvet drapes at the center of the stage. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us." Then, without looking at them, she spoke. "My name is Raina Mercer. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer was my brother." The officers paused. One of them pulled out a tablet and began scrolling. "We don't have that name listed under immediate family." Raina turned slowly to face them. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice remained steady. "You wouldn't. They never told me how he died. Just a box, a flag, and a note that said, 'Training accident.' But I know that's not true." Behind them, the sound of microphones adjusting echoed across the plaza. A colonel took the podium. "Today, we honor those whose names are carved not just in stone, but in the soul of this country." The speech continued, but Raina Mercer stood, unmoved. "I'm not here to protest," she whispered. "I'm here to remind them." The security officers exchanged glances. They didn't push further. Not yet. At the edge of the crowd, a black SUV rolled to a silent stop. Out stepped Karoline Leavitt, dressed in a fitted navy blazer and boots that had seen the Capitol steps too many times. She wasn't on the official program. She wasn't expected. But someone, somewhere, had forwarded her an encrypted file the night before. It had no return address, just a message. "She'll be at Fort Andrews, 11 a.m. Look for the tree." Karoline didn't know what she was walking into, but something in the woman's face as she scanned the crowd struck her. She had seen that expression before, in committee hearings, in whistleblower briefings, in mothers who didn't get answers. Karoline approached the cordon. A guard stepped in front of her. "Sorry, ma'am." "Restricted zone." Karoline didn't break stride. She showed her congressional badge. The guard hesitated, then stepped aside. She made her way toward the woman under the tree, just as the velvet curtain dropped from the wall, revealing dozens of engraved names. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed, but Raina didn't clap. She stared. One name in particular was missing, and Karoline saw it too. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, absent. "Why isn't he on the wall?" Karoline asked softly. Raina turned to her, surprised. Then handed her the leather folder. Karoline opened it and froze. What she saw inside would unravel the ceremony, the press coverage, and the official military record itself. A faded mission map, A death certificate with redacted lines, a photo of 6 soldiers, Mercer among them, with handwritten words in the corner. Ghost Team 9. Operation Drift Signal, June 17th, 2015. Only one came back. Karoline looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Is this real? Raina nodded. They said he died in training, but he died in a mission that doesn't exist. Karoline straightened her shoulders. Then maybe it's time someone made it exist. And with that, she stepped forward, toward the podium, folder in hand, the truth burning hot against her palm. The applause had only just begun to settle when Karoline Leavitt stepped toward the podium. Her presence wasn't scheduled. Her name wasn't on the itinerary. But she didn't hesitate. She walked with the confidence of someone who had stood in front of cameras that wanted her gone and survived every lens. The MC, a nervous junior officer, blinked in confusion as she approached. Congresswoman Leavitt? I didn't know you were. I wasn't invited, she said calmly, taking the microphone from his trembling hand. But I won't be long. The crowd quieted again, not out of respect, out of confusion. This wasn't part of the script. Karoline took a deep breath and held up the worn leather folder Raina Mercer had given her just minutes before. I came here today as an observer. I came to stand silently like the rest of you and honor those who gave everything, she began. But I can't do that anymore. Because today we unveiled a wall of names, and one name was missing. A murmur rippled across the crowd. A few heads turned. A few phones came back out. Karoline opened the folder. Staff Sergeant Daniel. Mercer, she said, voice growing sharper. Killed on June 17, 2015, during Operation Drift Signal, a mission so classified it doesn't exist in any official record. Except it did happen, and he wasn't alone. She held up a photograph. 6 soldiers in dusty uniforms, arms slung around one another, standing before a plain tent with no insignia. Only one of them came back. Her name is Raina Mercer. There was a pause. And then from the back of the seating rows a voice called out, "That mission never happened. My husband was there." A woman in a blue dress stood, her face pale, clutching a small flag against her chest. Karoline turned toward her. "What's his name?" she asked gently. "Sergeant Alan Bishop." Karoline nodded. She flipped to the next page in the folder. Also, listed as killed during a non-combat logistics incident. But his body was never recovered. His dog tags were found at the same coordinates as Mercer's unit. There are 6 of them. 6 families told 6 different lies. Now the crowd was no longer quiet. It was unsettled. A high-ranking general seated near the front stood, clearing his throat. "Congresswoman, I must ask you to step down. This is a formal ceremony." Karoline didn't move. "I'm not here to cause disruption, General. I'm here because someone needs to ask why these soldiers were erased, why their deaths were hidden behind generic phrases and redacted files." He stepped toward her. "They died serving in roles not meant for public recognition. That's the nature of black ops." "But they died," Karoline shot back. "And if we can honor the known, we must also acknowledge the forgotten." The tension in the air thickened. Karoline turned back to the crowd. "I don't ask you to. Believe me, I ask you to listen." She reached into the folder again and withdrew a single envelope. It was stamped with an old Department of Defense seal and marked confidential, eyes only. She placed it carefully on the podium. This envelope contains mission records, coordinates, post-mortem analyses, and communications logs that never made it into the official file. One copy is going to the Oversight Committee. One copy. She paused and looked to the front row, where the general now stood frozen. "Is going to you, General Rayburn." He didn't move. "You briefed that mission. You told these families their children died in logistics accidents. You signed the false reports." Whispers now turned into gasps. Karoline's voice dropped low. "Today, we honor the fallen. But if we don't confront the lies around their deaths, then this wall is not a memorial. It's a mask. And then she stepped back. Silence fell again, deeper this time. Raina Mercer, still under the tree, clutched her coat closed as the wind picked up. For the first time in years, her brother's name was spoken aloud, not in secret, not in shame, but in truth. The crowd didn't applaud, not yet. Some still sat frozen. Others turned to each other, whispering, questioning, re-examining everything they thought they knew. And at the center of it all, Karoline stood motionless beside the podium, her hand resting lightly on the folder as if to say, "I'm not done yet." The ceremony had ended, but the crowd hadn't moved. Some stood stunned. Others whispered into phones, unsure whether what they had witnessed was courage or defiance. At the center of the stone plaza, Karoline Leavitt remained beside the podium. Her posture straight, the folder still pressed beneath her arm. She knew what would come next. She didn't wait long. A tall man in a black suit approached from the edge of the security perimeter, earpiece coiled tightly under his collar. "Congresswoman Leavitt, Director Mathers would like a word. Now." Karoline nodded. "Let me guess. Off the record?" He didn't smile. "Very much so." She followed him to a waiting vehicle. The door closed with a deliberate thud. Inside sat Director Reed Mathers, Counterintelligence Liaison for the Department of Defense. His eyes didn't blink often, and when they did, it was calculated. "You just caused a national firestorm, Karoline," he said coldly. "I didn't cause it," she replied. "I opened the folder someone else buried." He leaned forward. "Do you even know what Operation Drift Signal was?" Karoline matched his stare. "Enough to know it shouldn't have been covered up with 6 fabricated death certificates." Mathers exhaled slowly. "That mission was classified Tier 5 for a reason. You've just put lives at risk." "Which lives?" she asked sharply. "Because the ones who died never got this much attention." He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a phone and held up an image. It was a grainy surveillance shot of Raina Mercer boarding a metro train at 3:14 a.m. the previous night. "She's being watched," he said. "And now, so are you." Karoline's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reminder. There are people above my pay grade who won't hesitate to remove obstacles. You just became one." Before she could respond, the door opened. "Again, your car is waiting, Congresswoman." As she stepped out, the sunlight hit her face like a spotlight. She turned back to Mathers. "If anything happens to Raina Mercer, I'll go public with everything. Emails, scans, witness logs." He didn't flinch. "That folder you're carrying," he said. "It's not the only copy." Across the city, Raina Mercer sat alone in a motel room. She'd moved 3 times since yesterday. The folder she gave Karoline was just the tip of the iceberg. She had more: records, maps, old mission chatter extracted from encrypted drives. She'd spent years collecting the pieces no one wanted found. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One word. "Run." The lights flickered once, then again. Someone had found her. But before she could move, the door burst open. The phone call came just before sunrise. Karoline was already awake, seated on the edge of her hotel bed, staring blankly at the folder now filled with sticky notes, highlights, and annotated timelines. "Congresswoman Leavitt, this is Agent Norwood. You need to come with us, now." "No more meetings," she said. "It's about Raina Mercer." Her pulse jumped. "What happened?" "She's missing." An hour later, Karoline stood inside a secure facility known only to a few congressional liaisons. They called it the quiet room. No devices, no signals, no leaks. Only soundproof walls and consequences. Agent Norwood placed a surveillance photo on the table. Raina's motel door splintered open, 2 masked figures exiting. No sign of a struggle, but the room had been stripped clean. We tracked her phone. To within a 3-block radius, then nothing. Whoever did this had help. Karoline frowned. From inside? Norwood hesitated. "I'd bet my pension on it." She looked him dead in the eye. "How long do I have before this entire story disappears?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he pushed over a small sealed envelope, found in Raina's bag. It had your initials on it. Karoline opened it. Inside was a flash drive and a folded sticky note. "If they find me, don't stop. Start with gray light. You'll know it when you see it." That evening, Karoline returned to D.C. and plugged the drive into a secured offline terminal inside her Capitol Hill office. The files weren't just military, they were congressional. One of them caught her breath, a signed letter from a member of her own party, Senator Paul Maddox. Authorization request, Project Graylight, budget reallocation for silent contingency operations related to Operation Drift Signal. Karoline leaned back, stunned. Graylight wasn't just military, it was political, and Maddox, her mentor, her former campaign backer, was part of it. Suddenly everything made sense. Why no one asked questions, why Mercer was ghosted from the records, why a memorial was built with missing names. It was never about protecting national security. It was about protecting them. The knock at the door was soft. Karoline rose slowly and opened it, expecting a staffer. Instead, she saw a young woman she'd never met, tears in her eyes, holding a photograph. "My brother," she whispered. "He was in that photo you showed yesterday. I've never seen it before. His name was Private Kyle Simmons." Karoline let her in. She didn't speak for a while, just offered the chair, then the folder. As the woman flipped through the documents, Karoline knew something had shifted. The story wasn't just a speech anymore. It was a movement. The Senate subcommittee room was colder than usual. Karoline Leavitt sat at the long mahogany table, a sealed manila folder in front of her, hands folded, face unreadable. Across from her sat Senator Paul Maddox, flanked by two legal advisors. The same man who once called her the conscience of the new generation now barely met her gaze. No press, no transcripts, no recordings, only truths that didn't want daylight. She began calmly. "Senator Maddox, do you recognize this document?" She slid across a printed authorization form with his signature at the bottom. It referenced Project Graylight, tied to black budget appropriations and post-combat asset sanitization. Maddox adjusted his glasses. "That form is over 8 years old, Congresswoman." "Then it should be easy to explain," he smiled faintly. Graylight was a hypothetical framework, contingency planning in case certain missions were compromised. Standard DC shadow work. "You know how the game is played." Karoline didn't blink. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here because one of those missions ended in 6 deaths and 1 survivor, and all of it was buried." Maddox leaned back, voice cool. "And now, you want to be the hero who unearths it." "I want the families to know what really happened," she said sharply. "I want the service members who were erased to be remembered." Maddox's smile vanished. Graylight wasn't about forgetting. It was about preventing escalation. That mission, Drift Signal, wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. Intel was flawed. The target was compromised. There was a second team, ours, watching from above. When the firefight started, it was already too late. Karoline's voice tightened. "So you let them die," Maddox's jaw clenched. "We contained it. And then you falsified their deaths and paid off the widows with cover letters." Silence. Then he spoke, low and hard. "Karoline, if you expose this, it won't bring them back. It will bring down the wrong people. People who had nothing to do with it. People who kept this nation stable while you were still hosting town halls." She stood up slowly. "That's exactly the problem. You think stability is worth more than truth." He stood 2 inches from her now. "And you think truth is worth burning everything down." She leaned in. "If it clears 6 names from silence, then yes. Let it burn." That evening, Karoline sat alone in her office. The flash drive was still, plugged in. More names were appearing. Secondary teams, contractors, transport pilots. everyone connected to Operation Drift Signal. Then her phone lit up. A message from an encrypted source. They're going to pin this on Reyna. They're calling her a rogue asset. They want her dead and discredited. Karoline's pulse quickened. The Beta government had moved from denial to counterattack. The war for the truth had officially begun. The Capitol hallway echoed with urgency. Karoline Leavitt moved quickly, not running, but close. In her bag was a cloned drive containing everything: Operation Drift Signal, Project Greylight, mission transcripts, even private communications between high-ranking officials. But it wasn't just the data she carried. It was time. And they were running out. At the Oversight Committee chamber, 2 guards stepped forward. One looked nervous. "Congresswoman, there's been a change in the agenda." She cut him off. "There's about to be a change and a lot more than that." Pushing through the doors, she found the room already full. Senators, aides, press lining the walls. The chairperson, Representative Danvers, frowned from his seat. "Congresswoman Leavitt, this committee is not currently hearing testimony on classified." Karoline dropped the drive on the table. "You are now." Gasps. She turned to the room. "I've come today not to speculate, but to submit proof. Proof that 6 soldiers were sent on a mission that was meant to fail, that they were abandoned, that one came back, and now she's being hunted for surviving." The room exploded into murmurs. Danvers leaned forward. "Are you referring to Reyna Mercer?" Karoline nodded. "She's being targeted as a rogue agent, but the truth is she's the only reason these files exist." A senator from across the aisle interjected. "Where did these documents come?" "From Congresswoman? And how can we verify their authenticity?" Karoline met his eyes. "Because they were never supposed to exist. That's why they're real." Another murmur. Someone whispered, "She's lost it." Another. "Or she's about to blow the roof off." Danvers cleared his throat. "This is highly irregular." Karoline stepped forward, voice calm but rising. "What's irregular is letting bureaucrats bury soldiers. What's irregular is creating a classified budget to erase mistakes. What's irregular is this committee doing nothing while a woman who served her country disappears without a trace." That silenced the room. Meanwhile, miles away, in a dimly lit underground facility, Reyna Mercer was still alive, but barely, tied to a chair, blood at the corner of her mouth. A voice in the dark. "You handed over the files." She smiled through the pain. "No. I gave them a copy." A fist struck. The room spun. But she didn't break. "They'll never find you in time." The voice growled. She whispered, "They already did." Back in the committee room, Karoline's phone buzzed in her pocket. One word lit up the screen. "Confirmed." She looked up. "We know where she is." Danvers stood. "Then go get her." Karoline turned and walked out, faster this time, because the story wasn't ending. It was about to break wide open. The van was dark inside. No logos, no plates, just silence and motion. Karoline sat between 2 federal agents from the Emergency Recovery Unit. Neither spoke unless necessary. In front of them, a 3rd agent monitored a tablet, live satellite. "Feed, building blueprints, body heat signatures." "She's here," he said quietly. "3rd floor, northwest corner. 2 hostiles, unmarked uniforms." Karoline clenched her fists. "How soon until breach?" 60 seconds. The building was a decommissioned field operations station, long since removed from public databases. Gray walls, no windows, the perfect place to erase a person, and yet somehow Reyna Mercer was still breathing inside it. Karoline had pushed everything into motion, subpoenaed a live operation, redirected federal resources, and forced the oversight committee to authorize the rescue, in front of cameras. Because if the system tried to bury this, she'd make sure the burial was televised. Inside the facility, Reyna's head hung low. Her arms ached from the restraints. Her face was bloodied, but her mind was still sharp. One captor paced, checking his watch. "Clock's running out," he muttered. "If she's not gone by the hour." A sharp boom interrupted him. The far wall caved inward. Flashbang, smoke, gunfire. Voices. "Federal agents down on the ground!" Reyna barely registered the chaos, but she saw the silhouette moving toward her, hand outstretched, voice urgent. "Reyna, I'm Karoline Leavitt. You're safe now." And for the first time in 10 years, Reyna let herself exhale. News helicopters hovered overhead as Karoline and Reyna exited the building flanked by agents. The cameras zoomed in, reporters shouted, flashes fired. Karoline raised her hand, not in victory, but in warning. "This is what happens," she said to the cameras, "when silence is weaponized, when the truth is labeled, classified. This is what it takes to bring one soldier home." She didn't smile. She didn't need to, because the world had seen it live, and that was enough. That night, headlines exploded. Karoline Leavitt orders live extraction of classified survivor. Congresswoman faces down shadow operation. Reyna Mercer rescued. What is Project Greylight? The country was no longer asking if it was real. They were demanding to know how long it had been hidden and who else knew. In a quiet hospital room, Reyna stared at the ceiling. Karoline sat beside her, reviewing files. "You're not a footnote." "Anymore," Karoline said. Reyna looked at her. "No," she whispered. "But others still are." Karoline closed the folder. "Then we go after the ones who put them there." The hearing chamber was overflowing. Press lined every wall. Military personnel stood in silent formation. Families of the fallen sat in rows, clutching old photographs and folded flags. At the center of it all, Karoline Leavitt stood before the Oversight Committee, with Reyna Mercer seated beside her, still pale, but no longer silent. The chair tapped the gavel once. "You may begin." Karoline's voice was steady. "I submit for the record. Operation Drift Signal was real. Project Greylight was real. And the erasure of 6 service members was deliberate." She held up a printed list. "Today, I read into the record the names that were never meant to be spoken. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, Sergeant Alan Bishop, Captain Zara Khalil, Specialist Layla Nar, Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb, Private Kyle Simmons." Her voice caught, but she continued. "These men and women were not casualties of war. They were casualties of bureaucracy, of secrets, of silence." She looked toward the gallery. "And it ends here. A beat of silence, then the first hand clap, then another, until the chamber erupted, not in celebration, but in recognition." Outside, the marble steps of Capitol Hill were filled with people. Veterans, students, journalists, survivors. The flags that once symbolized silence now symbolized resistance. Reyna stood beside Karoline. "They believed no one would come back," she whispered. Karoline nodded. "That's why you had to." A child approached. 8, maybe 9 years old. She held out a crumpled drawing. 6 figures in uniform, standing tall under a flag that read, "Not Forgotten." Karoline knelt. "Thank you," she said, taking the picture gently. "No," the girl said. "Thank you." That night, on national television, the Secretary of Defense announced a formal investigation into Project Greylight. Classified files were unsealed. General Rayburn resigned. Senator Maddox was subpoenaed. It wasn't over, but it had begun. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey. This story wasn't just about one veteran or one act of courage. It was about the cost of silence, the weight of truth, and the power of one voice to spark change. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Remember the names they tried to erase, and never forget, real heroes don't need to be seen, but they must never be hidden.